Good evening and welcome to our prose launch of Indelible's newly released issue, which is rightfully themed escapism, especially during these days where people are either finding ways or finding themselves entangled in ways where they are escaping from reality, or at least trying to cope with it, with the new reality that we are in. So literature and art makes times such as these more bearable, as we all know. And as testimony to that, we have our great contributors, the fiction and nonfiction contributors with us tonight, all of whom we are very honored to have with us featured in Indelible. So this is how it's going to go. Each contributor will have 5 minutes to say something about their essay or article or short story. And then there is a Q&A session at the end in which you are free to ask the contributors any question that you want or comment on their essays or articles. Some of you may have already read their works. Others may just be introduced to them for the first time now during this session, but feel free to ask anything you like. We have with us tonight Dr. Ahmad Sabha, joining us from Dubai, from AUD. And we have Professor Claude Barb joining us from Chicago. It's pretty early in Chicago right now. It's 8 a.m. Is it 8 or 9, Claude? It's 8, right?
8.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we also have Huda Mir Hashimi, an AUD student who also will be presenting an essay that she wrote about the coronavirus. Roman Volovoy. Roman, are you here? Oh, there you are. Okay. Roman will also be speaking to us about a research that he made. Trail Culture, joining us from Dubai as well. And we have Pierre Kardashia joining us from France. Where in France again, Pierre? I'm sorry.
Oh, Lille.
From Lille.
Lille, in the north.
And yes, and we also have Dr. Conrad Gunes, who is also joining us from, is it Dubai, Conrad, or Sharjah?
Sharjah.
It's Sharjah. Okay. So I would like to welcome everyone, audience and contributors, and we will start first. We will go alphabetically, and we will start with Professor Claude Hart. Professor Claude, the floor is yours.
Yes. Well, good afternoon, good morning. My name is Claude Barbery. It's good to be with all of you and see you again. And my thanks to Rula for organizing this gathering. I teach psychodynamics at this point, and also play therapy, working with children and families. I began as an English professor and then trained in New York and in psychology and spirituality, and became director of the Harlem Family Institute, where we saw children and families who from disenfranchised neighborhoods. And I did that for a very long time, mostly playing with children and sitting on the floor with trucks and drawings and all manner of experiences. Then I was pulled away to Chicago, where I've been for 12 years as a professor of psychology here. But my major interests have always been interdisciplinary, from really a psychology and humanities. My dissertation background was really in an interdisciplinary study of Otto Rank and his psychology of religion. And I sort of stayed in that place of Rankian's views of all of us are artists because we create a life and we make a life. And that was where Freud emphasized sexuality, Freud emphasized creativity. And that's what drew me to my research on him, which is in the paper, briefly. And this interdisciplinary interest for all my life really, I think, is emblematic of the organization of the paper in the journal, which is an attempt to look at an archetypal understanding or a historical patterns of understanding what is seen in the medieval term of acedia, which is pejoratively called sloth, and to see that as really the reticles of that particular phenomenon, how it stretches both back to earlier connotations as well as into modern psychodynamic, psychosocial understandings in its own meaning. I saw recently in the news that they found one of the oldest drawings in a cave in Indonesia, and it was really a very large pig, very, very reminiscent of the wild boar. Acedia is, they say the trickster, by the way, among the lexicon of archetypes, is the oldest archetype. But maybe with this discovery of the 50,000-year-old painting of a kind of boar-like figure, maybe we can make an argument for the sense of acedia. Certainly, the desert mothers and fathers felt like it was a very, very important dynamic that all of us need to be aware of in their teachings. And simply acedia is a sense of the inability to act, the inability to create a life, the inability to affirm one's own unique idiom, one's own particular way of being in the world. And it's a kind of heaviness of spirit that reduces an individual to a sense of a paralysis, or as the poet says, sneering at one's own star. And so I tried to write a little bit about, from different viewpoints, from the archetype of the wild boar, which is an image of acedia and all of its meaning, which I'll talk more about next week. But the wild boar is a great image because the boar just he digs and spends all day looking for truffles, in terms of sort of the image of the boar, and just stays busy doing very little except his own particular digging. As people know, boars come into your garden, they create havoc. But if you try to engage a wild boar, it will charge you. And then the heraldry of Europe, the wild boar is seen as a very dangerous animal. In fact, in many stories, begins with the death of a king because of a boar injury with a tusk. So it really captures beautifully the sense of when we're stuck. If someone pushes us to become active, there is behind that inactivity an aggression and a dangerous rage, which in archetypal literature, it really is played out and discussed in individuals' dreams, as well as just the awareness, almost like in fairy tales, just the awareness of when you encounter someone who has a kind of acidic personality and presentation. The intuitive sense is to try to encourage the person to become active. But the danger is that they are stuck in a place that can contain great rage and also great withdrawal. So it's a very interesting archetype, and I tried to write a little bit about it. And then I looked at Otto Rank's writing on creative will, about how do we get out of this stuckness? How do we get out of this paralysis? Rank really focuses on the sense of affirming one's difference in the midst of this paradox of both wanting to individuate, at the same time wanting to be part of a group. And being in this middle space, how can we then find a way of going on being? And his writing in the article on creative will is a suggestion about addressing this a particular phenomenon, not only from a Jungian approach, but really from Rock's view of engaging the creative potential in a person, especially in the therapeutic process. So I'll stop there. That's really sort of a summary of the paper, and I'll be happy to answer any questions about it as we go forward.
Thank you very much, Professor Claude. That was a great sampler of your essay. I will now share the link to your essay for those who haven't read it yet. So thank you so much. And Professor Barber will be with us on the 26th, same time, and he will speak about acedia in a lot more detail. Thank you so much. And next we move to Hura. Hura Mir Hashimi. Hura, it's the floor is yours now.
Okay, sure. So hi everyone. I would like to first introduce myself. I'm doing interior design in AUD. This is my second year, so I'm a sophomore. My essay is about COVID-19. I'm planning to read small parts of my essay. How far does a new bloodthirsty crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, bombard our mentality with far-reaching consequences? In 2019 in China, new cases were reported due to the coronavirus, and rapidly the virus became a world health threat for everyone regardless of their age. Evidently, the virus is not only a physical disease, as it also causes tremendously powerful mental disorders. The pandemic itself, along with economic recession, quarantine, and social distancing, have made a close impact on our mental well-being. Some experts regard it as a psychological tsunami, which is overwhelming and mentally sabotaging. In a tracking poll taken in July, it was estimated that around 53% of adults in the US reported that their mental health is negatively impacted due to worry and stress over the coronavirus. Intrinsically, this is comparatively higher than the 32% estimated in March and February 2020. Evidently, the coronavirus outbreak has caused numerous mental issues and has inflicted so much pain and detrimental effect on everyone's life, stretching from depression, loneliness, and sorrow. If the coronavirus outbreak, isolation, and economic issues, along with the constant flow of bad news of coronavirus, are saddening and forceful for you, you are not alone. In the midst of the current chaos, everyone becomes hopeless and overwhelmed to an extent depending on how they can manage their mental health. Dr. Colin Reeve, an addiction psychiatrist at New York University, discovered that depression symptoms are 3 times higher during the COVID-19 lockdown. This shows that the effect of quarantine on people's mental health are accelerating tremendously. According to numerous scientists and psychologists, there are many potential factors which contribute to depression and have a direct correlation with this newly prevalent mental disorder. Essentially, isolation can fuel a depressed mood, as humans are hardwired to be with their loved ones and demand close contact with them. Thus, being away from not only the close ones in public, but also endless months of social distancing, kindles depression and makes one feel supportless, hopeless, and helpless. To conclude, in less than a year, this new disastrous pandemic has initiated a constant emergency state for every human being universally. COVID-19 has sabotaged not only public health, but also has given rise to countless mental disorders, starting from depression to loneliness and deeply felt sorrow. It has been found that the depression symptoms are tripled from last year, and this means that people are losing their spirit and are leaning towards demoralization and distress. However, there are some ways to tackle and diminish the effect, such as meditating, video calling the loved ones, finding hobbies that suits our character, and learning new skills which can possibly be done at home. These solutions are highly crucial and urgently needed because the number of people with mental issues has nearly doubled in the past year, which is surely due to the coronavirus and has bombarded many people's life with feelings of loneliness, melancholy, bereavement, and anxiety.
That shed some great light on the topic of the psychological effects of the coronavirus. And I believe Professor Barber's idea on acedia might also be added to this. So it would be a great discussion to combine both contents of both papers. Thank you so much, Huda. Looking forward to hearing your discussion on your paper. Next, we move to Dr. Conrad Gunes, who is joining us from Sharjah tonight. Dr. Gunes wrote a fiction piece called The Artist. And Conrad, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if you can hear me well, it's a short piece. It's only 1 page. So you can, if you haven't read it yet, accomplish that reading while I'm speaking, and you will be finished. Some enthusiasm is already voiced there from our Arabic community by some Mr. Khalid. Tell him to keep the microphone open and the enthusiasm flowing. So there is no denying that that short piece, The Artist, with a female protagonist, is of course fully autobiographical, reflecting my interest in support of all things feminist. And as I try to tell my students always, especially in this region of the world, it has nothing to do with women's empowerment, but with equal gender inspiration. So how did this come about? I wrote this piece while I was still in my doctoral studies, and I combined my trajectory up to that time, which is rather multidisciplinary. I started out being a fully acknowledged lawyer with 2 German exams, including the bar exam. So yes, be afraid. I am a lawyer. Whatever you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Then, of course, I had an epiphany, as all sensitive people who study law, that this is only a career subject, but of no humanistic value whatsoever. And while I had specialized in international law to give it at least some worldly friendly touch, I then switched to master's degrees in Bath and Paris of contemporary European political culture. So you can also already see where this was going. And then finally, a PhD in education and cultural studies, setting me on a respectable path of a human being. And that brought me finally to you. That, for example, brought me memberships in the Center of Interdisciplinary Research in London, where I met also Arola and Claude, and we shared several conferences together. We will have a conference next week, by the way, in case of some of you will tune in. Rula is going to chair my keynote session, and I will be speaking about yes, so get ready, please. Dress warm. So in all of that multidisciplinarity, I have also acquired a number of languages. So as posted on my LinkedIn profile, I've given a keynote conference presentation, not just for LCIR, where I'm continuously taking up space, but also for other organizations in altogether 16 languages, because once you're multidisciplinary, you might as well be multilingual. And then this has all brought me to your glorious friendship and contact, because now, having edited a couple of literary comparative literature books and working on another one, including poetry right now, Rula's is also there in between. So Rula, be scared on several accounts. I will be editing you very shortly. So now I'm with you and sharing gladly these rather humanistic pieces, such as The Artist recently, and I might contribute with another one coming up called The Traveler, slightly longer. Again, a female heroine will play the main part. I found that is much more interesting for both genders, because even men tend to relax in friendly expectation when they see a female heroine wielding the pen and the sword, kind of embodying the samurai warrior who is both adept with a weapon and with a pen, as in that culture that is seen as the embodiment of manhood. And so I try to do the same, combining academia, arts, and athleticism. And when I'm not found in the classroom or the library, it will surely be the gym, the running track, the swimming pool, or the piano recital chamber. So yeah, that's a bit about me. trying to be as modest as possible, however, also as truthful as possible, finding that, of course, not easy as a man, as a German, but counting on all of you that you will appropriately tone me down, and having spoken after the illustrious Claude, that is coming much more easy. So I think enough about me. And back to you, and please ask any interested questions that might set me on an even more sensible path of human and artistic development. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Conrad. And I'm pretty sure that your story will get so many questions about how it's like to write about women, autobiographies about women, whereas, you know, from a completely different perspective, the perspective of a male. So this is very interesting. This is what makes your work very unique. And I'm pretty sure there are many readers who would like to know more about your experience in writing that. So thank you so much, Conrad. And next we will move to Dr. Ahmad Sabha. Ahmad, we can't hear you.
Hi, can you hear me now? Okay, good. Hi, everyone. I'll give you a quick background about me. I'm a writer, a poet, and a critic, and have written in many different genres, from fiction, longer form and shorter form, some prize winning, much criticism, both belletristic and perhaps more scholarly, and much poetry and so on. I like to work in different genres. As long as I'm using the English language, I don't mind. Well, anyway, my piece in the Indelible was a piece which was about escapism in terms of the intellectual life and the ways in which being bookish and reflective can be a refuge, and escapism becomes less of a pejorative term and more of a healthy, dignified term. I wanted just to show you this, if I might. This is my latest book. It's a collection of essays published between 2012 and 2020, between peer-reviewed scholarly essays, conference papers, review articles, and some reflective pieces. It's called To My Mind, or Kimboats, and it's kind of, that title has a slightly playful, ironic ring to it, because my sense thing is that when one gains insight in critical writing and critical thinking, often enough it can come from an interface between who you are and your thoughts and the kind of objective artifact you're reading through. There's this nexus I find always in my work. Anyway, I wanted to read, if I might, the epilogue of this book. It's quite a serious-minded book because it's all critical writing, and I think it's all, you know, on the whole, quite good work, I hope anyway. But the epilogue I wrote intentionally is not a critical piece, more of a creative piece, and it's titled The Charlatan. And I wrote it in particular because I like writing satirically, especially when I'm enervated by slightly silly comments around me. And it's like my revenge. So Claude will understand an element of rage in this and anger in this satirical writing, anger and rage being kind of often enough sublimated into satire. And I'm just hoping it'll make you laugh. I should say my big bugbear is, and this is true, I am not multilingual. I have a bit of Arabic, a bit of French, but generally speaking, I'm precious about my English. And this is kind of a humorous comment on that. So let me read it to you. I hope it makes you laugh. It might take me about 5 minutes, but I apologize. But I hope it does elicit some chuckles. I'm proud of it. And it's the one part of the book, now having got used to all the other contents for years, that I'm actually, you know, I like to read myself. The rest of it I've forgotten about. As always happens, as we all know, with writing, we always get excited when it's about to come out. And then once it's... Anyway, The Charlatan. A glass of scotch asks not for love, only to be drunk, be it sipped or be it gulped. And by hook or by crook, it will have its chief, or at least presiding desire, sated. A glass of scotch, you might say, is thus a very fortunate member of the human race. Most of us, if not all, so rarely satisfied with our landed lot. Indeed, to put a fine-tuned point on it, a glass of scotch like this, so sated and accounted for, beds among the rocks, it nonetheless makes its own, turning these icy stones into honeyed waters. But to start with that is merely to start with the curtain call, or if it's preferred, given the odd delicate temper among my readers, is to start with a late desperate cue from the wings. That now said, a matter of belated urgency quaffed, I hope to start now, if again, with a brief discussion or disquisition on the subject of a certain harebrained charlatanry. There is nothing perhaps so false, sham-like, so much a pitiful foil diverting the traffic of licit thought, as what I believe is termed, jargon now shorn, a faux European. A phony, of course, or the local Arabic idiom of recent close vicinity dubs with much good neighborliness, fannas. I will try the trial of trying to make sense of this term, mat or abyssal, as it may turn out to be. The first thing apposite I'd have thought to state in clear and distinct, strangely periodic prose, is that I'm a British citizen, or, to solve now preemptively the school of pedants champing at the bit, a British subject. The recent hoopla, hullabaloo, and brouhaha surrounding the debates, the actants, and the issues of Brexit may have only muddied the archetypal waters I'd hoped to surf or glide across as part of this ineffable gambit of parsing a term. So, as of some inwending date, which is to my feeble mind, one that failed and fails to follow the humdrumness of current events, I presume I will cease, a British subject, from being a European member. For parsimony then, to make the soi-disant theorem I here attempt to elaborate more elegant, let us assume that that devilment of a date has arrived and landed and rendered me non-European. Fine. This eventuality, in the event or not, would not, I don't think anyway, render me a faux European, only a non-one. Thus, as we begin to untie the various philological knots, the term at hand and in question must mean to intend something more forceful than a mere external negation. It must, I'm now of the mind to think, intend in all its intention a true-boned internal negation, a man or woman or child who is not only non-European, but is somehow using Europe or the European as a screen to shore up some gap or hole in the national identity they may erstwhile hold. To be a faux European must mean to ape Europe in the blood rills, while having, shall we say, Timbuktu pulsing down the avenues of one's veins and arteries. Fine. I believe we might just be getting somewhere, marking ground, meaning something more than a mere pleonasm with what has just been said. We must, in short, be making incisions, which is a grand thing to do. My next estimation, one rung above a guess, is that a faux European might be a man or woman or child who reads a text originally penned in some European tongue foreign to Anglo-Saxon, but reads it in translation knowing only Anglo-Saxon. Even here, though, there seems to be a small knotted difficulty. You see, if a text, let's say Alice in Wonderland, is originally written and published in the original High German, and yet there does pertain the excellent universe of matter in whatever hypothetical corner or nook or cranny, an English version, then I'm still unsure how the non-High German reading chap or dame or kid would be committing a falsehood. I will now try the trial of making this point clearer, freeing it of dregs or pellets, and perhaps airing it with a newer pellucidity. First is the obvious point, I hope, that if there is an English translation, it was not commissioned to become so and thus to be marketed so in whatever backwoods bookshop for the reason of the rabbit hole. My most native assumption in this scenario, call it if you wish a conservative intuition, is that such an English translation of, say, Alice in Wonderland was published in order to be read. And even if not to be read, which is quite logically possible, to be purchased in order for the publisher who'd effected the daft commission in the first place to at last recoup some of the overlaid cash money spent. Now, imagine you are the 7-year-old child in question and, having strayed from your parents among the milling crowds of Leicester Square and found yourself briefly orphaned along the Charing Cross Road, you decide to enter one of the many second-hand bookshops that hawk their wares there. After, shall we say, a good 20 minutes of deep and detailed perusing, you alight on the High German original of Alice in Wonderland. Naturally, you are delighted with the cover image most of all, not being a scholar as yet at least, but this may well change in a decade or so, should the possible world decree it in the actual, of High German, and you approach the counter a foot above your chest in height, and quietly inquire if there might be present and to hand, or in the possible world of down the road, perhaps an Anglo-Saxon translation of the plaintive tome in your hands. Now imagine you are the luckiest, flukiest 7-year-old in town, and the shopkeeper, who by the by has just returned from a matinee performance of some opera of Mozart's, announces to the second rung on the ladder of your delight that yes, he does indeed possess the book in question, translated into English. He now reaches back behind him to a shelf closeted to the rest of the world and brings the precious gem forward. The 7-year-old, by all the fluky fates, has a 20-quid note in his pocket and decides to purchase the book. Later that evening, having rejoined his parents, the how so of this issue being a point nugatory to the plot of my niggly task at hand here, the child decides to read the book. And now, having done the goodly bit of the goodly analytical philosopher, the heurism opens itself out to the original question. In reading the work of High German, but in the Anglo-Saxon translation, has he now, all 7 years of him, his tissue, bone, fat, nerve, cells, and microbes to boot, has he now, in the alchemies of the European Academy, subtly transmogrified into what I believe is called a faux European? Needless to say, I put the question to dozens of colleagues in the philological domains at over a dozen conferences over the last 5 years spent puzzled by this conundrum, and have come to no resolute solution. That being so, I then prayed to the good God, having spent a small while translating the prayer I wrote out myself in my own hand in Anglo-Saxon into High German on the off chance, and who knows that God prefers to discuss such matters in that high-toned idiom. I prayed and prayed, asking God to do what he then thankfully did indeed do, proving by the by that prayer in High German is a good wagering gambit for the supplicant. He proceeded, under the supervision of 2 archangels, specialists in this field of divine intervention, to dig up, recompose, and reinvigorate Friedrich Nietzsche and Tolkien, author of The Lord of the Rings. On waking, reborn, the 2 gentlemen, one suffering still and perhaps strangely with the syphilis that turned him a crazy man unto death, the other smoking the same pipe he'd perished beneath the day of his own passing. The 2 gentlemen, one resolutely gentle, sure, the other a bit more of the maverick, were, after short bylones, assiduous to help me in my deep-bound philological endeavor. My assumption, announced of course, was that any work these veterans of the study at hand might work at, beat tussling and without joints or flesh or even skin, with the earth's mites and grubs and lice and so on. And I think I was right in this assumption. Alas, the honorary gentlemen were of no concluding aid. Nietzsche averred that the 7-year-old was full within his British rights to read the High German in translation. Tolkien, however, not the most modernist of men, believed that the child inside the heurism in question might well possess the right which Nietzsche judged his due valid possession, but only if the child also read the text, and first of all, in Latin. I found the sparring of the 2 expert opinions of not much progressive hope in the end, and so I suppose I must find this landing light, that to be a faux European means perhaps to be a citizen, or subject perhaps, of a continental European nation, and to read the books written and published in your own most native idiom, German say, French, but only and exclusively in the Anglo-Saxon translation. Just so, good men, women, children, patriots, all of them, have died ignominious deaths. Right, that's just a satirical piece at the end, because all my critical writing in the book obviously is on people who wrote in English, but I tend to use a lot of European sources as kind of aids in terms of intellectual opening up texts and so on. But I've never written an article or a book on a European writer who writes in European language that I don't read myself. And so that piece was kind of a satirical rage-like funny bit to kind of counter those, I suppose, silly, ghostly things. Anyway, I thought it was funny. Anyway, thanks for that. I enjoyed it.
That was very witty and thought-provoking. Thank you so much, Ahmad. Thank you. So next we move to Pierre. Dr. Pierre Kardashia, who is joining us from Lille, France. And one very interesting fact about Dr. Pierre is that he is an escape game designer. Many of you may have been into an escape game before. And well, this is the guy who's behind the whole, the traps that you get into and untangle yourselves from. So Pierre, tell us a little about your paper, yourself. You asked the question in your article 3 times.
Yes.
So what are we escaping when we escape an escape room? And you make us think a lot about the whole process.
Hello. Hello, we hear me? Yes? Yes. So yes, I have a PhD in philosophy, and one of the first book I read in philosophy begin with De nobis ipsis silemus. So it's always hard to talk about me. So let's talk directly about my article. My article is composed by three development of the same question plus a translation of a song. Why three development of the same question? Why this form? Why this question? My PhD was in logics, and I'm full in this kind of question. I always want to the form correspond to the content and so on. So my first intention was to defend the poiesis of game. It is a very serious and very practical problem because today a game author can claim any copyright over the rules of the game. You can claim copyright about the text, but not about the rules. And so every people can duplicate the rules with another text and another material. And it's very concrete question. So my first idea was to defend the idea that creating rules was a kind of poetic activity. So I decided to make a frontal charge, tayo, frontal charge, conceptual charge, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work because to understand the problem, the classification of game design in kind of technical activity and not poetical activity, you have to have a unified background of philosophy of game, which does not exist. People can say philosophy of game in singular, but it's a kind of a nominative, nominal artifice, because there is not one philosophy of game, but a lot of philosophies of games which didn't agree on the object they are talking about. And to be honest, it's not a very well-known domain of philosophy. So to write my article, I had to make a kind of summary of philosophy of games, and it will take hours and hours, and it will be very dramatic. The first step is the opposition between poiesis and mimesis, and it's very complicated. Poiesis and mimesis, it can take hours and hours and hours, and so we can't write an article beginning by this question, too hard. So I decided to change my tactic and to make the opposition more palpable, tangible, more possible. So I decided to make a mimetic version of philosophy of game and a kind of poetic escape from this definition. So mimetic, you know, maybe the classical translation of mimetic is imitation. So the thesis of the mimetic version of game design is every game is a repetition of the world. And it has a corollary, which in my sense is worst, is that every player is a repetition of the subject under the form of an avatar. Yes. In this version, the game is a repetition of the world, but where does this repetition happen? Is it in a kind of underworld, a kind of separated world? We don't know. We don't know, and it makes us think about this question. It is a relationship between the world of the game. Where are we? And in substance, it is very, very practical. It makes games fiction, games become fiction, complex, interactive fiction, maybe, but making so we deprive the game of all the effectivity. They are away in a kind, and the guy we didn't play have kind of meta position of observer, so we have a kind of the game, the world. The world is the meta game of the game, and we don't know. It's very cool for some authors to make like that, because they allow us to foreclose the game in childhood. The game are separated in another world, the world of innocence. They are not serious, and us fully grown people are serious. We are serious, and it works. So it is a kind of a summary of the mimetic conception of game. Game, to make it short, game are simulation of the world. Subject who plays of the game are simulation of subject. But for a lot of reasons, it doesn't work like that.
Thank you very much, Pierre. This
okay,
was,
wow.
This made us think a lot about what happens to us. Can't hear us?
I have finished.
Oh, you're not done. Okay, I thought you were done.
No, because I have to explain the second version.
Okay, sorry for this. Yes, please go ahead.
The poetic version, very
go ahead.
Verify. The poetic version is very simple. It is niche, men's maturity.
Yeah, I thought you were missing it out because you know, in the end, you conclude your essay with the poesis aspect. So please go ahead. Sorry.
Yes. So in the other end, we have niche man maturities. It's to have regained the seriousness that we had as shield at play. So to make this, I use this dispositive, this kind of construction with the repetition of question. What does people escape when they escape from an escape game? And this question, when you use it on the mimetical version of game design, just to create a stupid conclusion and show that we can't use it, and we have to have another solution, and it is poetic version. The translation of the song is just the development of this point about the question of subject, because if we change the definition of subject in game, players become something else, and it's interesting but very long to explain. Thanks.
So that is it, right?
Yeah, yes.
This is a great sampler for Pierre's article, which will make you look at, which will make you perceive this whole concept of escaping in an escape room. So thank you so much, Pierre, for this very interesting article and the presentation of it. Now we will move to Roman.
Hi.
Also put the link of, everyone's links are there. So as soon as a speaker finishes, the link to their article or essay has already been put in the chat box. So Roman Volovoy, go ahead.
Right, so my name is Roman. I'm a third-year student at AUD right now. And as part of the English 102 class, I wrote an essay. We had to write, an essay about contemporary issues of, of us humans. And I decided to write about the dangers of social media because I feel like it's an issue many people don't even know exists. And I personally have social media, but I only use it for, messaging. I don't use it for, its designated purpose of, sharing content and, being public. So yeah, I'm gonna read an excerpt from my essay, and it's just gonna be the first 2 paragraphs. It's not gonna be a lot, but like an introduction. All right. So as Bill Murray asserts, social media is training us to compare our lives instead of appreciating everything we are. No wonder why everyone is depressed. Social networks are everywhere. It will not take long to find people staring into their phones in public, engaging in their electronic social activity. On the surface, nothing appears to be wrong. People use these incredible tools to connect with friends worldwide, stay up to date on news, and participate in groups of interest. However, the pretty user interface hides many tricks and methods aimed at keeping users engaged and participating. Software architects build these systems with deep understanding of human psychology and behavior. Social networks abuse a fundamental mechanism of our existence, the need to form groups with other people, communicate, and coexist. Amia Philopphia, a former Facebook's vice president for user growth, said in an interview, social media is ripping apart the social aspect of human existence by creating a divide in communication, understanding, and unity. Digitizing our lives through free centralized platforms which profit from human attention have created many problems in society, including addiction, behavior manipulation, and misinformation. One of the first and most apparent issues with social networks is addiction. It may come as a surprise that that was an unintentional design decision. The more time a user spends on the platform, the more money that social network makes. The feed is a constant supply of information about friends' posts, reposts, and subscribed groups, and also advertisement content. The algorithm chooses the information according to its value and scarcity. Streaks of uninteresting information are interwoven with attractive posts to keep the user engaged. And the anticipation of another jackpot is what makes social media feeds addictive, but very subtle in their action. One of the studies statistically proves that social media causes behavioral addiction similar to that of chemical drugs. Researchers describe and compare human behavior alterations with traditional addiction classification parameters, such as conflict, mood modification, relapse, salience, tolerance, and withdrawal. In the study, most participants were found with all 6 traditional classic addiction parameters due to irregular use of Facebook. The ease of access to this wealth of information makes it extremely hard to abstain from using the platform. Frequent mobile phone notifications and email reminders of missed events keep users hooked. Another issue is that social networks are capable of behavior modification. The collective attention of its users fuels the platform. One of the metrics that any social network tries to increase is cost per click. The metric describes an amount that the advertiser will pay for a user who clicked on their ad. The more users engage with the ad, the more money Facebook makes. So it is in the platform's best interest to learn as much as possible from users' actions, predict their behavior, and personalize the content. But how does the algorithm get to know the user in the first place? Likes are a universal metrics that is an indicator of what user prefers. Seeing but not liking a post is an indication of disinterest. In another study, researchers used personal traits and social media activity history to create behavior models. In the conclusion of the paper, they state, we show that a wide variety of people's personal attributes, ranging from sexual orientation to intelligence, can be automatically and accurately inferred using their Facebook likes. Their dimension reduction model was able to find if the subjects are satisfied with life or are emotionally stable, and whether they are introverts or extroverts. This information is what gives Facebook enough intelligence to drive the prices of targeted advertisements up. The research also stated, since this information is inferred from the user, it is not legally required to request individual consent or notify the user. As the behavior modification, okay, I'm going to skip a little bit and read the last sentence of this paragraph. So this former executive of growth at Facebook I mentioned before stated in the interview that your behaviors, you do not realize it, but you're being programmed. It was unintentional, but now you have got to decide how much you're willing to give up.
And this is one of the biggest dilemmas that people are finding themselves in these days. It's a huge topic, and thank you so much, Roman, for bringing it out in your essay. and for actually conducting some great research on what are some of the theories and some of the proofs that show us how much we are being controlled by social media, or as you say, as you end your essay, how much we are being programmed. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to your discussion of this essay later. Now we will move to our final speaker, Trail.
Hi.
Trail Koshan. Hello, Trail.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay, great. So hi, my name is Trail. First, thanks, Rula, for organizing this. They're always so fun, and like what a variety of different kinds of goodness. Like it's really nice. Let's see, to introduce myself, I was just gonna copy Omar's. I'm a poet and a writer, and I'm a critic, but not of literature, of pretty much everything except for literature. And I usually keep my criticisms to myself. So I will just kind of read my bio because I hate introducing myself. So, but I'll put it in, try to put it in first person. So I'm an American, but I haven't lived there since 2002. I might go back now that we've had an inauguration. I'm a teacher and a student focusing on culture, underdogs, third spaces, and validation in higher education. My writing has received honorable mention in PACA's Flash Fiction Contest at the Foundling Review, published in Proximity and Sukun magazines. I contribute to Dubai Poetics and some other online places. And I attended South Carolina Governor's School for the Arts for creative writing. I also have a book of 99-word essays, maybe prosums, I don't know, called Revolutions, and you can get it on Amazon. And I have 2.5 degrees that have nothing at all to do with writing. So that's who I am. When I was thinking of escapism, I was thinking about like how I escape from Dubai each summer. I sort of leave Dubai, as many do, and escape the heat. And I go to this, my off-grid cabin in the woods in Washington State. So my idea was kind of to think about this and take it to the extreme. Like, how would I escape into the woods if I had nothing, if I didn't have my solar panels and my rainwater harvesting system and propane or anything? How would I survive? And that's sort of where I was coming from. I don't really say, in this piece, I don't say much about, I write really short things. So I often, you know, let you imagine the rest. So I don't say much about context or the character. But I'll just say I was kind of imagining like post-apocalyptic escaping into the woods. And when I was rereading it for tonight, I was kind of like thinking, well, maybe this isn't even a human. So you can just keep those ideas in mind as I read it. It's called Symbiosis, and it's fiction, clearly. So symbiosis. Cedar trees grow short but thick here, where the forest meets the cliff. Their boughs are stringy, not brittle like the fir, and they bounce, supple, swaying if you hang. I braided 3 young trunks together here, and after years they have grown entwined to form a hollow. I lean softly under, inside, resting, keeping warm with their bark between my back and the prying winter wind. I'm looking out today because it's cold and wet and dangerous out there. My cedars stand above the waterfalls with its slick rocks and constant torrents freezing into sleet. I haven't the courage to scale the cliff or descend nearer to the shore today. I cannot fish. I am hungry, but I cannot reach the meat. The wolves came and drank this morning as I watched, quieter than usual. Their faces were bloody, bellies full. The children pounced on their mother's swinging tails, but they were silent and did not interrupt the waterfalls with howls or yips. The elder looked up here to where he had caught my eye in the sunshine last time they passed this way, and then they disappeared. I smell it now because I'm still starved. I creep out further than before, survey the cliffs and hunch over to touch the ground. Cedar leaves are scaly, flat, and decay to make the soft soil quiet. They absorb the moist of waterfalls, the heat of sun, and today the sound of footsteps. I find the fleshy bone he left behind the braided trunks. I heard nothing. I exhale grace between my teeth and go back inside to feed.
That was lovely. Thank you so much, Treya, for your lovely contribution as always. And I mean, hearing people, as you said, from different backgrounds, engaging together in prose, in another form of literature that is not poetry, we come to realize that, okay, I mean, we've had a lot of open mic evenings before where we found poetry to be a connective force. This is the humanities translated in metaphors and other figurative language, but prose is also a bridge. It's a bridge that brings people together, that brings ideas together, whether it is fiction and nonfiction. So we have the creative and the cognitive written together. And I really want to thank everyone for being here. We have psychologists, philosophers, environmentalists, lawyers, professors, game designers, students. So this has been a lovely gathering and bridging of different disciplines and different interests in life. And I mean, it was wonderful how you could all relate to the theme of escapism in this issue. And thank you for making it a really, really special issue this time, and for showing us that literature is for everyone. We can all write, and we can all speak and think better if we write it out. So thank you so much, all of you. And we could have a 5-minute break before the Q&A session. So if you guys want to stretch your feet, move about, be ready for the questions, prepare the questions a little more fully. Once you're back, feel free to write the questions in the chat box. And then when your name is called, you will be able to ask or have the speaker answer your questions live. All right, so we'll be back at 7:07 Dubai time, which is 5 minutes later after now, wherever you are in the world. So see you soon.
I think it's Khalid Hamad wants to ask me a question. So Khalid, if you wanna, if you can hear me, if you wanna put it in the chat box, I'll prepare my answer if it's something I can answer. I just saw something on the chat box that you said, can you ask me a question? That's fine. Sorry, I know it's the break thing, but if you want to do it now, Khalid, I see you there. If not, I'll wait.
Yeah, hi. Can I ask you the question now, if it's okay?
I'd rather you wait until the Rilla comes back. Otherwise, it's not fair to her because she's the one organizing it.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. No problem.
Let's wait. We still have just 2 more minutes.
No, I was just suggesting he formulate it in the chat box so I could prepare an answer.
Yes, yeah, that would be good. Unless you prefer to.
That's fine. Either way, it's fine with me.
Yeah. But you'll be first on the list as soon as the break is over.
Okay, thank you.
All right, just 2 more minutes.
I hope I don't get too tipsy.
Take the first question, just to make sure that everybody is here. And so far, I can see only one question, which is Khalid's question. And so we'll go by order. Whoever's question appears first in the chat box will go first. So I would like to ask you now to put your questions there. All right, 5 minutes are over. So I would like to invite everyone to have their questions in the chat box. And as I just mentioned, we will go by order. So whenever your question appears in the order that it appears in, we will take you, and you can either use the mic or not use the mic, whichever way you prefer. So first, we have Khalid. Khalid, would you like to ask the question?
Yes, I'll ask him a question.
Okay.
When you're writing poetry, do you involve things that have happened to you in your previous life, or do you mainly write about like other people or other situations?
It's a very good question. When I write poetry, I tend to write about relationships, and they're normally from my perspective. I tend to be mainly, lyrical, or sometimes I tell a story, but generally it is very much, egotistical in the sense that it circles around me. Yes. I've written the odd bit and piece, which is more objective or, third person, but generally, when I write poetry, to be honest with you, it's often enough. It's just because I have a mood and I want to deploy the language. So often enough, I can write something very simple or something very complex. But either way, if I'm using the language and getting this kind of visceral kick from the use of language and the rhythm, then it doesn't really matter what I'm writing about. But as it happens to date, I've written mainly about myself. My first collection, which was in 2010, was titled, maybe some of the people here might be interested in this, My Only Ever Oedipal Complaint. And it was a lot to do with my parents and other relationships to which I responded from my perspective. And generally, quite a at that time, at least in 2010 or before, when the poems were being published piecemeal, kind of quite pained perspectives. But the hope is now and then that you're able to again sublimate the personal feeling into something that is respectable as a poem, and not just, you know, therapy. You know, I do believe this is true, that poetry is an art, like in most art forms. It should have a certain amount of technique to it. There's no particular rule book, but the point being, it should have integrity as a piece of art and not be a kind of directly transitive therapeutic splurge. You know, that's what I try and do. But often enough, I do that. But once in a blue moon, I hit the right thing, I think. So yeah, so that's a bit of a dilatory response. But yes, about myself mainly, and those I love, and or sometimes hate. I don't really hate that much, but sometimes I do. Yes. Okay.
All right.
Okay,
Thank you
so
very much. Thank you, Dr. Sabah, and thank you for the very interesting question, Khalid. We have another interesting question now from Glenda. Glenda has a question for Professor Claude. Intrigued by the idea that our life is our art, what do you think of the idea that the universe can best be understood as a work of art?
Well, I think it's a good question. You know, I was thinking about poetry, the question that was asked to Omar just now. I often write poems about things that bewilder me, and I think that the you know, W.H. Auden said that someone asked him why he writes poetry. He says he likes making little marks on an empty blank page, because this was fun. And I think that's really quite wonderful. And I never know what's going to happen. I have a thought or an idea, and I begin writing, and then it kind of takes a life of its own. I think all of us may resonate with that. Sometimes I end up going places where I didn't expect in terms of my subject matter. The artist and creativity that Ronk writes about, yeah, he sees that creativity actually as a cosmic force. He sees it as a force that is, I think he was responding to Freud's view of trying to understand the psyche as a kind of law of natural science, like gravity or electricity, that certain drives in us, you know, have a particular resonance with what he called his metapsychology, but he often joked and said it borders on the metaphysics, as he tries to imagine this sense of what drives the human being. I think Ronk wanted to emphasize not so much the biology of the mind, but a sense of a force that has been neglected, and which he called the will. But when he talks about will, he always talks about creative will. And there is he talks about how in the universe there is this almost kind of like little marks on a blank page. There is this sense of something emerging as a sense of a life force. I often think that Ronk is writing, when he wrote his book Psychology and Soul. I think he, you know, and psyche in Greek means soul. I think what he's writing about is actually a soul force. We can say it's a life force, but it's very different from sort of the natural science of life force, but they overlap. There's the sense of creativity and being and aliveness. So I think your question is very good, and also connects strongly to the poets. There's a poetics of being that Ronk sees in terms of that we can't. So I put it this way: someone asked C.S. Lewis one time why he prays, and he says, "I can't help it. I can't do anything but do that. I do it like breathing." And I think that is the sense of the force of will in us that is perhaps borrowed in some means from Nietzsche, because Ronk was interested in Nietzsche and idealized him early on. But but also felt Nietzsche didn't, didn't go far enough into the idea of the collective connection, the sense of belonging versus the individual. So Ronk tried to play with that more. But I think that cosmic force that you are seeing would fit very beautifully. You could even write it at eco-psychology, I think, using the idea of a particular soul force within the natural world. So I'll stop there, but it's a very good question to think about.
And a very beautiful way of answering. Thank you. I mean, this answer, we could kind of stretch it next time during your full session, Claude. That would be great. I'm sure so many people wonder about, this universal, this cosmic connection, the spirituality of creativity. So we also have another question. Dr. Ahmad Sabha has a question for Professor Claude. So Ahmad.
Hello, Claude, if you don't mind. I'm very interested in this phenomenon of acedia. I've come across it many times in my own writing about English writers in the 19th and 20th century. Yes. People like John Stuart Mill, Carlyle, Newman, and then Chesterton in the 20th century. They all went through this period of blandly described depression, but acedia is a good way of talking, it's much more incisive. But they go through this kind of period of no, only to come out with the yes, if that makes sense. The kind of romance pattern of descending in order for ascent. And what I think is very interesting for me, and I've got a lot of, I'm sorry if I'm joining in with my own book, but I want to see what you think. What often happens, I think, that the biggest thing that leads to acedia is not imaginative or emotional life, but pure logic. That when you are, in a way, too logical or too analytical, you can actually tie yourself up in a paralyzing knot. Yes. And Chesterton has this wonderful passage, which I always loved, because he went through something that I went through when I was his age, when he went through it. And he says that madness, or like unhealthy psyche, is not what we normally talk about, the loss of reason, but actually reason and nothing else. That the person who's got delusions, let's say, he says, I'm King of England, and you say, no, you're not. And he says, well, that's what they would say if they were trying to get rid of me. They always have a theory, like a paranoid theory, right? It's airtight. It might be stupid, but it's airtight. And he has this lovely description where he says, the sane man and the healthy man are just as logical as each other, except the insane man has a small circle, and the sane man has a bigger circle. They're both as airtight, but one lets more life in. And I want to ask you, do you find that actually it's not rabid imagination or fancy or emotional passions that gets people into acedia, but actually too much logic? Does that make sense? Or
yes, it does. I was, when you were talking, I was thinking there's a wonderful passage in Dylan Thomas. I can't remember the short story. It's in his collective writings, where I think the character, I don't have it in front of me, but the character's name is Enoch, I think McLeish. And he's at a bar, and there's a man at the bar talking about his glory days of being a soccer football player. And he's talked about how great his team was. And Enoch, sitting at the bar, he says, liar. And the man says, well, I have friends who can attest about my years as a football player. He says, bribed, said Enoch. And he said, well, I have papers, I have documents, I have stories written about me in the newspaper. Forged, said Enoch McLeish. And he said, well, I have a trophy on my wall. And he said, stolen, said Enoch McLeish. It's very funny. And it's, McLeish keeps almost a kind of mirror to Bartleby the Scrivener. It's almost like kind of a mirror in the sense that he's not going to leave this sense of his view of the man talking about his accomplishments.
Right, yeah.
So there is that sense of, the wild boar often will be stuck within a kind of radical certainty that can masquerade as a kind of intelligence sometimes, or a sense of superiority, but actually it's a defense against doing anything, really about changing and growing, and that organic sense of creativity that Ron talks about. So it is, I think, clinically, there is a sense sometimes of individuals can be so certain about their particular place that they're stuck. And that stuckness is a hallmark of the acidic personality. And also, what's I think so fascinating about it too is that it also reflects a kind of spiritual depression, is my argument, that a lot of times, not so much a clinical depression as an organic sense, but a kind of deflation of one's even a sense of that there can be something outside of that rationality. And so in clinical work, the more you push a person like this, the sometimes the more rational they can become. And then that's where the aggression, you push them too much, and like the wild boar, they'll rake you with their tusks. And so you have to be prepared for that to come out of the bushes. Which every hunter in Europe wrote about, is the coming out of the unseen with this aggressive, because you're bothering their rationality. Yeah. So you have to be careful if you push Enoch McLeish too far. There's what's behind all the sense of being stuck, that Dylan Thomas is writing about.
Thanks very much. That's actually, that's really the boar. Actually, think about it. It's kind of digging its own hole, with its tusks, and kind of being very, very kind of vigorously engaged, but in a pointless task, or at least it looks like that to us. Can I just recommend to you, if you haven't read it, nothing to do with Christianity, but G.K. Chesterton's little spiritual autobiography, Orthodoxy. It's a small book. Yes. I think you'd find it so fascinating if you haven't read it. Maybe you have, but it's got some really interesting thoughts about this. Irrespective of a biographical religious belief, just the kind of the thinking that goes on there is really interesting, I think, and insightful. Yeah.
I think that's an interesting point. I just say that Chesterton, I remember he said that Christianity hasn't been tried and found lacking. It hasn't been tried. And I always chuckled at that, in a sense of like, you could be very busy with the almost kind of like Pierre was talking about, the game of the ritual and the liturgy, without actually moving from it.
Breathing spirit into it.
Chesterton's very good about that. I think he's marvelous, and he's constantly to be rediscovered.
And he also kind of, the way he writes, because it is so, he writes in a paradoxical formulas and so on, but it does actually really trigger thought in the reader, because you start to think about things in different ways. He's got this really engaging, enervating style, which can be, it can be fallacious if you don't agree with him, but it's still very, very engaging, no matter what you think yourself. Yeah. There's also, by the way, the William James book, the Gifford lectures he gives at the end of the 19th century, the religious experience ones, where he talks about this phenomenon quite a lot, about second-born people and, first-born people, and how people, often have to go through this idea to get to the better place, the more individuated place, I suppose. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Sorry, guys. I have some questions that are flooding into the inbox, but thank you so much. This is such a wonderful, wonderful discussion. And I'm really looking forward to our future sessions, and I'm pretty sure that there will be more questions on acedia, actually. There's one here already. So the question that's coming in next is by Samad Hirani. Samad has a question for Roman. What had inspired you to write an article about social media and how it affects and controls the human mind?
No, it was like, it happened to me when I went to like the summer camp in America, where they taught us like, SAT and, like all these, college prep. And they had one rule, is that you're not allowed to have a cell phone and you're not allowed to use it. So there I made like really close friends with people, because everybody was like actually like attentive. Everybody was, engaging with each other. I mean, everybody still had, a phone, like, hidden in their room. But like when people were out in the public, everyone, was like, communicating like normal people. So they really got me thinking, about like, why are we all just so addicted to social networks? And, at that time, I also read like a couple of articles about how, Facebook is tracking everybody, ranking everybody, like extracting profits. And I really like understood this idea of, if something is too good to be true, it probably isn't. And, this idea of having a free service, like it's not free, like you pay with it, with your attention to the ads. Like you see ads, you kind of, like the service is not free. Like you trade your attention for, for basically using something to connect with people. And I think many people don't see this, and I just want raise a little bit of awareness about this. So yeah.
All right, thank you, Roman. Thank you very much. We have a question and a comment for Professor Claude. The question is, how much acedia is there now in the COVID world?
Well, I think it's a truth is that acedia has been seen by the sort of lexicon of sins that from medieval until and I traced it back to even early writings in Hebrew that it's a description of that sense of inactivity that is driven by driven by a kind of sense that one cannot make a life. So I think that it's not so much the pandemic that will create it. I mean, it's been there. It's been part of the personality that writers have been warning about ongoingly. However, I do think it's what we can talk about spiritual depression as a opportunity to be able to begin to take account of what we are missing in our life, which could be in some cases the silver lining within a very tragic situation of having to be separated from each other in a particular way, which the COVID-19 is creating. So it's almost if one is feeling depressed, we don't have to leap to a clinical definition of the person. I mean, I think all of us are depressed into thrown into ourselves, almost like Heidegger would say, and from the necessary sense of public health and separation. So maybe it can be a very helpful term to think about, because it's also a gateway toward renewal. And as I said in my article about beginnings in play, one reason a warrior will eat the meat of a wild boar is not so they become inactive. It's because that energy has to be titrated and changed and redirected. And perhaps I know when I talk with old friends and we're all separated, there is an energy of reunion and connection and what is meaningful for us, almost like Roman's talking about discovering meaning again when you don't have something. I think that maybe acedia can be that turning. I talk a little bit about that, about the how acedia can be a gateway or portal to actually creative will.
Thank you, Claude. You also have a comment from Glenda. Glenda says, I think COVID-19 lockdowns breed acedia. And to engage, we go to the addictive social networks. So this kind of bridges what you were saying with what Roman was saying about social media nowadays. So do you agree to that?
I certainly think that, you know, one can use anything to maintain an acedia if there is as the term says, in a refusal to be in the world. Jung said that he talked about legitimate suffering, that actually neurosis was the old term. Neurosis is actually a refusal to suffer. And that only through our suffering can we find a going on being. So, you know, in terms of acedia being part and parcel of people losing themselves in social media is a danger. I'm not technophobic. In the sense, I think that actually technology can be a great tool. It's just when it can be used in a way that can be in service of all manner of obstacles. So I don't think it's a kind of panacea of understanding the acedia that we go to social media, but it certainly can be used. And even before COVID-19, sometimes, according to your theme about escapism, people sometimes live the kind of limbo life within social media, where they're in this in-between world, you know, of being and not being. That's something that is a larger discussion about, you know, about social media and technology and the multi-phrenia of technology today.
Thank you so much, Claude. We're greatly looking forward to your discussion on acedia next week. I mean, I'm pretty sure that there's still so much to say about it, and apparently many people in the audience were very interested in the topic itself. And I have another question here. It's set on private. I think it's, yes, the person who asked it left. Okay, this question is for Conrad. Conrad,
Oh.
how
Excuse me,
critical?
I'm in a session. I'm in a session.
Oh.
Yes. Sorry, I had to take a call from a student.
That's
I
fine.
am there with you. It's okay. Okay. It's okay.
So the question is, how critical is it for you to write from the perspective of a woman?
Well, it's critical in several ways. First of all, it's of course a great relief and the delegation of responsibility, since I can of course say pretty much everything when I put myself in the other gender, can fantasize freely, and can get away with murder, so to speak. After all, it's not me, it's not even my gender. No, but seriously, it is a great exercise in putting yourself into the shoes of the very literal other. It stretches your imagination as a writer because you have to make a conscious effort to go outside of your every zone, comfort zone, identity zone, and everything else. It is an exercise in humility and also in fantasy, because I can now freely associate what the best of both worlds, the male and the female, would come up with if they can now on paper shape an imaginary figure that tries to bring the best of both worlds together. So it's kind of freeing oneself from the shackles of gender and creating a heroine that maybe fittingly is occupying the traditionally, classically, discriminatingly fairer but weaker sex, but that then transcends that cliche, that limitation, that discrimination, and maybe therefore is by putting a story in the past all the more a valid representative of how our future could be as human beings in the 23rd century. So I think it is the artistic license for realizing dreams of what we all would like to be. And I think the female figure, as Dan Brown would say, is anyway the one that has been suppressed for too long. And I don't mean in terms of the usual talked about gender discrimination. I mean more symbolically, you know, as he says in the Da Vinci Code, the female as such, the female as an idea, the female as humanity's potential, it's time for it to rise. And to give a simple, banal, but terrible example, it is probably the typical male attitude represented by Joseph Oppenheimer when he had successfully unleashed the atomic bomb, that he said, "Oh, I have become Shiva the destroyer." Yeah, well, he had that feminist realization just a bit too late, because it is that rational power, destructive as such, well, constructive if used well, destructive if used badly, that has brought the world to the brink of disaster several times. It is the female unifying force that might heal many things. I'm not one of those who puts female and feminism on a pedestal to the detriment of male. I'm very aware that feminists, a famous feminist quotation from, sorry, the blackout, once said, "I'm aware when I'm walking across a bridge that the bridge was very probably built by a man, and I have to respect it." It was one of the greatest feminists who said that. Anyway, so I'm just using the body of the female in order to transcend limitations.
Thank you so much, Conrad. This is very interesting. I wonder if it gets easier with time, or is it still the same challenge, the level of challenge that you have?
Well, I think it should never get easier, because that effort to write from a perspective of a woman can never be completely natural for a man, neither should it be. It gets easier to do that step outside of yourself. And after some time, it is the gender identity of choice that you assume as a writer. Well, you only have two to choose from anyway. So what is more productive and creative than to, before you even put pen to paper, already step outside of yourself? And to put a banal metaphor to it, I rather be heroic in the body of Lara Croft than of Ethan Hunt, James Bond, or whoever they are all called, for the simple reason that at least Lara Croft has the feminine dimension in addition to the ass-kicking male one. She already does that anyway, just as the male counterparts. But when she bows down in a Thai bow in front of the Buddhist monk who has healed her between two ass-kicking missions, when she removes the plaster and sees the tea has healed her, she can be feminine without having to step down from her heroic pedestal on which she is. So I simply believe that the male-female dimension is adding one that male accomplishment all too often deliberately, sadly, forgoes. When James Bond is feminist, he's probably in danger of being seen as a pussy, and that's why the screenwriters don't write too many vulnerable elements into that kind of character. Lara Croft has no problem with that. After all, she is a woman. So I think that's a very useful starting point.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Conrad. Unfortunately, we still have so many questions that will have to be left unanswered today because we are a little over time. So, but this shows us how interesting all of your essays and articles were, and how your audience is really interested in what you have to say and tell them. However, I invite all the audience to feel free and leave their comments on Indelible. So in the comments area under the article that you are reading, if you have something to ask the author, then please feel free to do so and be as interactive as you want. It doesn't have to end here during the session. And I would also like to invite you all to Professor Claude Barb's really interesting session on the 26th, same time, 6 p.m. in Dubai. And prepare your questions. prepare the essay itself, start reading it, crystallize your ideas, come up with comments, and I'm pretty sure, Professor Claude, you will have a lot to answer. So again, once more, thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much. I want to thank the contributors for coming from different disciplines and different areas to show us how writing can really make a difference in the way we share our perceptions with one another. And I want to wish you all a good night or a good evening or good morning, wherever you are. And I hope to see you again soon on the 26th.
Thank you, Rula. It was wonderful.
Yeah, thanks for organizing.
Thank you for
Rula.
organizing.
Thank you all
Thanks,
so much for
Rula.
being here.
Thanks very much.
And sorry for not being able to take in all the questions. So hopefully we will have more time during our next sessions. All
Thank you,
right,
Rula.
so see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.